Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to Insurance for the New Possible, a Chubb conversation. Garrett Olson, the head of insurance and ERM at Wolt, and Sebastian Zulueta, the head of digital business Chubb in EMEA. Digital platforms are no longer mere marketplaces. They are ecosystems of constant activity, risk, and trust. And with all of this activity, every click on a link or tap on a screen has consequences. How do we build integrity into our online malls? What happens if trust breaks down between the buyer, the seller, and the courier? Can insurance itself become invisible, built in, and automatic? Join us to explore how risk, protection, and scale intersect in today's on-demand world. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us today. I trust the two of you are doing well.
Doing well.
Doing good. Thank you, Mike.
It's awesome to have you here. Okay, Garrett, let's start with you. Big picture, really big picture. What do you think it takes to build trust and safety into the fast-moving world of digital platforms?
So the way that we look at it, the digital platform is ultimately a digital mall. Yep. It's not just like a metaphor. It's like a civic space, and ultimately it's intermediated by code. And like this ecosystem, building trust is just as if we were walking into the mall ourselves, right? You need to leverage data, and you need to leverage the identity of individuals, which would be digital identity. And you also ultimately have to automate how we actually look at these individuals. And if they're not good actors, how do we actually remove them? And you have to enable inclusion. So everybody should have access to these like platforms, but ultimately enabling the integrity of these organizations that are driving these things. We need to keep in mind that they're borderless in real time, and it has to be ultimately dynamic.
That is such an awesome answer, because you've basically segued into every topic that I want to cover in more detail. That was awesome. Seb, is there anything that you want to add to that?
I think what's very exciting about a business like Wolt and what we're seeing at Chubb Digital is just how you're seeing, the strength of these brands are now being seen as, end-to-end, providers of everything. Your whole life can now be with a platform, and the trust that these brands have is maybe it's happened in the past, but a company like Wolt, so many people doing so many different things rely on Wolt to provide for them in different ways. And from an insurance point of view, that's kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to really add significant value and de-risk so many things that happen in people's lives. And I think a lot of underinsurance, when you look at the world, there's still a large section of the world is underinsured, and I think a lot of that has to do with just access. Everyone needs it. They may not want it or want to buy it, but when they use it, they're grateful for it. And I think working with a business like Wolt gives us that opportunity to reach people that haven't been reached before. And make a massive impact on their lives.
I love the way you guys have set this up. Garrett, I want to go back to you, if you don't mind, because you talked about this idea that like the online world should mirror the offline world, that it shouldn't just be a metaphor. It should feel the same. And this is something that I've been thinking about actually for a really long time. Why is it that I feel like I can go online, I can have 25 different identities, 13 different avatars and all these things. I don't need to be me. It doesn't feel right. But let's talk specifically about online malls. How closely should an online mall mirror the construct of an offline mall?
Well, it should reflect the spirit of an offline mall, trust, visibility, public norms, right? But to do this, you need to literally leverage data and the digital identity that I referred to.
Yep.
And ultimately, these platforms, it's not about just enforcing policies, right? What has to actually take place is aligning the incentives between all of the individuals that are participating in this online mall, right? And ultimately, this is accountability and traceability at every node, so the overarching security. And trust really hinges on verifying identities and the intentions of these individuals. And when you walk into a physical mall, you are intrinsically like scanning all of these physical cues of individuals, right? But on online platforms, this has to be done at the design phase where verification protocols and behavior analytics are actually used. So ultimately, a lot of the similarities between the two, but we have to really use this from a technological level instead of a physical level.
So again, awesome. I want to get to Seb. Did you want to jump in and say something?
No, I think I'm learning. I'm learning from Garrett here. So shooting from the hip when I say things like, that makes a lot of sense. And if I think about going into a mall, it's interesting how you immediately expect certain things to be taken care of. And also, of course, if you're a seller, if you're working in a mall, absolutely, you would expect your business to be, have certain infrastructure in place to deliver. So I can see from Wolt's perspective, very challenging, but also incredibly exciting from how much impact you can have on businesses and customers.
I want to break down what you said in the last second into two categories, right? So what defines integrity on a platform where these buyers and sellers are always intersecting, and Kerr's as well? And the other thing is, I like this idea you say when you walk into a physical mall, you're scanning, you're looking around, right? So how do you facilitate that type of scanning in this context of the definition of integrity on an online mall? You said data, but can you be more specific as well?
So who are these individuals, right? What type of device are they entering this mall on? What are their actual behaviors, right? Whether this is like from visual recognitions or pattern recognition or financial transactional like amounts and values. So like data is transcending across multiple different processes, right? So how you interact, what you say and what you do, the time of day that you're doing it, any type of repetitive actions. And so that is really where the enforcer, right, which would be the platform, it has to build these like nimble protocols at a very technological level, like more or less at every single node, if we were to get into the technological terms.
Go for it.
And really like look at like how these individuals are authorized and being able to kind of ensure the accountability of what that person signed up to do, right? And again, that could be an earner, that could be a seller, that could be a buyer. And each one of those are interacting on the platform. And I think the complexity comes is when they're multiple at the same time, right? You could be an earner and a seller and a buyer, technically,
right,
all at the same time.
Yeah. So how do you do this though, right? I think about this a lot. I can't open a store in a mall without signing a contract, somehow getting physically vetted, showing some identification, maybe even putting down a 2-month deposit for the store that I have, figuring out a way to get my goods into that mall physically, and then understanding like whose credit card the person who's using it is buying. Do you want me to deliver it to your home? Like all these little things are going on. Again, how do we do this online? And I want to share a story with you, actually, if you don't mind. I went to buy a car. This is years ago, and it actually makes me laugh every time I tell this story. So I walked into a physical dealership. It was a Range Rover dealership. I don't know if I told you this when we were prepping. And I was wearing a pair of shorts and a T-shirt and some flip-flops. So the guy could not believe that I actually had the intent to buy, if you understand what I'm saying. You know what I mean,
Absolutely.
Though, right?
Absolutely.
But I knew that I could afford a Range Rover. There was just no way for me to explain that to him by the way I was dressed and the way I appeared. But I'm sure that happens online as well. There was a way for me to tell him my intent by saying, he said to me, "What do you drive?" And I said, "I'm driving a Mercedes E430. That was my way of showing him what my intent was, because I couldn't make that up off the top of my head. But how does that happen online? So that the sellers can say, oh, there is some intent here to do something. This person's actually a good actor.
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways in multiple companies, and we're actually, some of the things are also being like built in-house, right? So the first one is like identity verification, right? This is like the basic like government IDs, facial pictures, like all the different types of documents that are kind of given to us by some type of like regulatory or governmental body, right?
Right.
The second thing is around like device fingerprinting, device recognition, and now starting getting into like the technical like capabilities of monitoring how they're actually entering into this space. And then the third thing, which I mentioned, is around like that behavioral thing. Like, what are they doing that piques interest, that creates spikes, that creates repetitious behaviors that are known factors of fraud or of other type of positive things. And like the monitoring of this, the constant monitoring, the pattern recognition, and we're ultimately like building these kind of fraud models. If we were to look at on the negative side, there's a lot of positive sides as well, right? Like certain groups going in and doing certain things, that's when we start kind of looking at pattern recognition, and that's when we start like using artificial intelligence to also push products and services, or say, hey, listen, this is an amazing seller. He's crushing it in this specific area. Let's try to get them into our ad space. And so he can start marketing to help him grow, because ultimately the sustainability of these sellers, the longer that they are a resident of the mall, the better and stronger the platform is, because certain customers only come to the platform for certain sellers.
Right.
So I think like ultimately the behavior and the identification of both the device and the individual, those three are major constructs to be monitoring on a regular basis and dynamically.
It's just, and dynamically, right? It's just so interesting. So I don't think we talked about this as well before we started recording, but I'm actually part of a group of people in the United States that invest in malls pretty much in almost every state in the United States, like physical malls. And this idea of like the behavior of the people that come into the mall, but also the sustainability of, let's say, the anchor sellers in there, whether it's a cinema or, a big department store, is actually really important. Because, when I thought about this original conversation, I thought you want to have safety and control for the buyers, but actually the sellers need the same type of thing as well, right? Because the longer that they're making money, the better the mall itself is, whether it's digital or offline. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, when I was a kid, I think growing up in the Midwest, it was pretty common, whether it was because of just bad weather or just that was what you did in like the early 90s, was like to go hang out at the mall,
Exactly.
right? And like my parents knew that I was safe. I was either bowling or I was playing video games or I was spending money on baseball cards, right? But I was still safe. And I think like ultimately most parents would probably not allow their young children to be hanging out in digital malls today and spending the amount of hours that I was spending in physical malls. And so it's really our like ethical duty to make sure that parents, or me now as a parent, should be able to like afford that kind of same opportunity to my children, because ultimately there's going to be a lot more digital malls than physical malls in the future.
So is mall culture the same in Europe as it is in the US?
I think malls were probably more around like plazas and kind of more open spaces, like still outside, but you still had that like security and comfort of like knowing, I can take my bike to the plaza and hang out. Like, yeah, maybe there's these specific things, but like there's those social cues where
like
everybody is
village.
monitoring, right? There's just still a safe village, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the mall culture is different, but that depends on kind of like specific things, but you then drill that down to kind of like certain stores, right?
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, look, you could make a connection between the centro in like an Italian city or a palazzo, right? Or even I was in Amsterdam, where you guys are actually just a few weeks ago. And as we were walking around, there were little centers of gathering places there, and they all felt very safe to me, right? And that was really important, actually. And I think online has to be the same way. And I've thought about this for the longest time. Can we talk about two more things in a little bit more detail? I don't feel like I have a digital identity that I've actively made myself. Does that make sense? But I know it's out there. But also
that I know of,
yeah. But I'm aware enough of the way technology works to know that it's out there for sure. But not an official one. Do you know what I mean? But I live in a country, Thailand, where everybody has a digital ID and they use it for a physical ID and they use it for everything. Right? They have a national ID and they use it for everything. Which means that there's no way for an individual, no matter if they're in the smallest village or in the biggest city in Bangkok, for them to get anything done, whether it's banking or buying a house or getting a loan or whatever it is, without showing their ID. And that has a number, and everybody has a number. Is there a way to enact that using digital ID, like official digital IDs on the malls? Is that the idea here?
So in Denmark, we have a technological feature called MIT ID, which is a ID that's been granted to you, right? And the banks are using this, the health providers are using this, even certain airlines or insurances, like a handful of different groups are utilizing this to verify whether it's transactions, if it's you, a handful of different things. And I think that ultimately platforms will have that fingerprint of sorts attached to an individual, whether that was created and opted in to share that willingly, or something that was actually constructed through XYZ kind of data nodes to then create that, where then you're constantly benchmarked or kind of confirmed against that kind of like ID. And whether it's important, and I don't know that yet, I think we're still kind of in the early stages, whether it's important that you know that that exists or not, I think what's important is that when you don't want that to be used anymore, like I don't want to go to this digital platform anymore, they wronged me, or I've left the country and I have no more access to that, or I don't have the finances to participate on that platform, like you have the right to be deleted. And I think like that's probably what's more important than the fact that like, hey, that they actually created this digital ID of me, because ultimately it's for your safety, right? We would want to know if someone actually took your ID, right? This unknown ID or this device of yours and are actually incorrectly utilizing that, right? Some creating like nefarious activities. And so whether you know or have approved, I think is somewhat important, but what's most important is that when you don't want it to be used, because it would be like almost naive to think that it doesn't exist, that you have the right to be deleted.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think about deletion all the time. I definitely know there's a digital identity for me out there. I just don't feel like I have complete control over it. Can I ask you if you think about it this way as well? And this is a little bit of a long explanation, but I do feel like that the digital world, almost by definition, is evolving in the same way the offline world did, is just faster. Right? So if you go back 100, 200, 300 years, little towns were organized. But if I literally walked 10 miles to the next town, they had no idea who I was. They relied on me to tell them the truth. There was some word of mouth there, basically. And over time, we've just built these sort of systems, right? Societal and civic systems that said, here's the way we identify ourselves. I mean, I think I heard somebody say even 150 years ago, there were no passports. People just traveled the world freely and just, went around. But over time, we built these systems. So I'm pretty confident that that's going to happen online as well. Does that sort of progression make sense to you too?
Yeah, I mean, everything from like the way that you're using your Face ID on your iPhone to the way that you're logging into your computer with your fingerprint, right? Like, and then you have like government kind of bodies that are creating these like digital IDs like they have in Denmark. I think absolutely it is a lot faster, because also bad people are working just as fast or faster. Yeah. And so you absolutely have to keep up with them. And unfortunately, they are usually a step ahead.
Yeah. It's just such an interesting topic for me. And again, I think about it all the time. Okay, let's get specific about gig workers. You have people coming into your house, interacting with strangers, interacting with your family. We kind of joked about it before, like what could possibly go wrong? But what happens if something does go wrong? Let's talk about that first, and then let's talk about how we disintermediate that.
I think from my side, gig workers, independent contractors, like these individuals have a handful of operational, personal, and kind of like reputational risks that they're exposed to, right? Yeah. Whether you're working in someone's house, constructing furniture, whether you're letting someone stay inside your house, right? Or whether you're letting someone into your kind of personal space to hand you a bag or a grocery bag of food, right? I think all of those create this kind of shared fault tree when something does go wrong, right? What you refer to as these unfortunate incidences. Yep. And it happens, right? It ultimately happens, and it's almost human nature. If it's not happening, then something's also wrong. Like we don't work and live in like this like perfect world. So what we really want to address in this space, and it was a conversation that we were having right before we recorded this, was we look at this in three areas, right? These operational, personal, and kind of reputational risk. We're looking at this as kind of play, work, live. And there's different products and services that should be offered or afforded to these specific individuals because of just inaccessibility to those, or the lack of understanding or education around those types of like products. But ultimately, something will go wrong, and it's really somewhat an obligation, given the kind of individuals that we know are on these platforms, that they have access to these safety nets.
Absolutely. And you just, you just cannot see or foresee as, a gig worker, all the things that could go wrong. Yeah. And also, you would probably be really surprised to know that, you could have insurance that steps in and pays your bills for 3 months or whatever it might be, in the event that you're ill, or you lose a contract, or you lose work, you lose a client, or something else happens. I mean, I think a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of that. And, I think still something like 90% of the, 90% of white collar workers are, work for corporations. I know this isn't necessarily white collar work in all senses with gig, but that's changing a lot. I mean, you've got, most young people now work for themselves.
Yeah.
And they don't have the benefits that you would have working at a large company. And these are taken for granted. Health, dental, if you're sick, you can take time off work and you still get paid. There's a lot of these things that I think actually that, the narrative out there is, hey, work for yourself. It's all roses and lying on a beach and making loads of money, and there are tax benefits too. Right. Yeah, exactly. But as I've worked for myself. You work for yourself, Mike, and as that's not actually the reality. There's a lot of anxiety around getting your next deal, getting your next contract. If anything happens to you, your laptop goes missing. It's a serious problem. Yeah. So you do live in a much more turbulent world when you're kind of just relying on yourself. And I think that's exactly where like someone like Wolt and Chubb together can step in and provide huge amounts of comfort, and to an extent make the whole digital nomad dream a reality.
Sorry, can I share something with you as well? This is years ago too, when I had a corporate job. And I was the exact avatar that you were just talking about. I never thought about not getting paid if I didn't go to work. I never thought about not getting medical care if I was off for 2 weeks. I never thought about it at all. And it only hit me once when my family went on vacation with another family, and that guy was an entrepreneur. He was running his own business. He was doing really well. But we were literally sitting around chatting around the pool one day, and he said to me, hey, can I ask you, because he'd never had a job. And he said to me, hey, can I ask you a question? If you don't go to work like during this vacation, do you still get paid? And he wasn't trying to be a wise guy, because it just never occurred to him, because he was like, if I'm not working, I'm not getting paid. But is there, like, we talked a little bit about where insurance fits in, right? Can it be automatic? Can it be invisible? Where does embedded insurance fit into this, Seb, into this journey of an end user or a buyer or a courier or a merchant? Where does it fit in, and how does it work?
That's a very, very good question. And I think ultimately it really depends on the use case and kind of the propensity to buy. I mean, that's always the way the lens to look at it. What's the propensity to buy? Is it very strong or is it very weak? And let's just take this avatar as an example, the gig worker who, digital nomad, creator type, maybe, white collar type work. Probably the propensity to buy some basic form of insurance is reasonably high. But then I think they need to have the option to top that up, increase that, learn that it can be equity that you essentially build into your life. So, the more you may work on, we have a product at Chubb where essentially the more you work on a platform, the more work you commit, the more the larger the payout in the event that you can't do any work. So I think there's got to be quite a reasonable sort of kernel of propensity, and then you sort of grow that education with the policyholder over time, and you grow that education, and then hopefully ultimately you do want them to claim, because then they can really feel the benefit, and they know it's not just smoke and mirrors. So really when it comes down to actually making the customer have access to the product, ultimately it is a combination of are you positioning it right in front of the customer through the platform, and are they in the sort of are they in the right moment to actually transact on the insurance.
So can I ask both of you about this? What if the insurance was available, but it was invisible, right? There was no user, you didn't get a choice, no terms were shown, it was just automatically included, right? And we have other places where like I almost think about this like a Happy Meal in a way. Do you know what I mean? You buy the fries, you buy the burger, you get the Coke, it's just there. Nobody's asking you if you want it, right? Could this be like some kind of breakthrough? What do you guys think?
I think for me, like, the insurance needs to be radically simplified to get to that space. And I think like 100%. Invisible insurance comes like, it's super sexy, right? It's something like, oh my gosh, like just like you mentioned about the Coke, right? It's just there.
Yeah.
But really to get to that stage, we have one step before that is to build the trust, right? You can only be invisible if it's a trusted and kind of transparent kind of component, and it's embedded into like the way that they're actually living. That's why I had mentioned earlier that we have these like, we're looking at something around actions rather than kind of like terms, right? Play, earn, live. Like these are the kind of like segments, and like when you build insurances into those kind of natural actions, then it really is invisible, and that it's only visible when it's needed. And I think like that's the target state, is that insurance should only be visible when it's needed. And it's not for all groups, right? Like if I'm in the construction industry, I probably want to make sure that there is like policies in place and I'm checking certificates and there's a handful of other things. But like when we're talking about the independent contractors, for example, or even some of the merchants on this space, absolutely it should be invisible. It should be based off of a handful of data sets that are between either the platform and that specific end user. And those data sets are used within underwriting to automatically turn these things on and off dynamically, which is really embedded into the actions of that individual.
I definitely agree with that. And I would say that the question probably the more relevant or kind of up-to-date question on that would be, how invisible can we make complex insurance products? Because you have no additional NACs, we call them no additional cost products, embedded in your Amex card, or so you get your travel insurance, etc. And you're like, and you're surprised. You're like, oh, thank God I had travel insurance with my Amex. And actually, in relatively extreme cases, microinsurance in emerging markets has grown out of telcos embedding life insurance products at no additional cost, at huge scale, millions of people getting access to life insurance, for example, or funeral insurance, whatever it might be. So sort of high impact, highly emotional sort of product types. So I think there's a kind of merging of the two worlds, where you've got these kind of low impact. I mean, well, it depends if if your travel is severely disrupted, that can be high impact, but it's kind of less emotional, less complex. And then you've got these very simple but highly emotional and sort of complex, and sort of where they are and what's problem they're solving for people in their lives. And that's kind of merging together now. And I think the sweet spot is really great products that are invisible, because that code hasn't yet been cracked. So for businesses, for people, and if we crack that code, I think we're into a very, very exciting place.
How do you strike that balance between this idea of it's not completely transparent, but transparent enough, but seamless enough so that it doesn't get in the way? It's a really tricky question, right? Because you want a balance, and maybe it's like a constant movement, but how do you accomplish that?
For me, at least from our side, so having it being like, I think what you're saying is like native to the experience, it really comes down to identifying what are the best triggers. What are the best triggers to turn on these insurances, and what are the best triggers or things happening, incidents that would trigger a parametric claims payment, right? If you really want to make this like invisible, right? Ultimately, a product is turning on and off based on some level of data insights or some type of signal. And then this signal understands that there's some type of an event that occurred, and that event triggers an actual payment. I mean, that's why I say like invisible insurance, it sounds amazing and it's super sexy, but it's fairly complex because we're still not there yet, right? The insurance companies, the claims processes, the third-party administrators, like all these different cooks that are in the kitchen. But to actually have this be invisible, you have to have a clear alignment on what those triggers are or those signals are, and that the end user or the one that would be obtaining or participating in that invisible insurance, agrees that those are the right triggers for him or her.
And also the servicing around it. you may want to speak to somebody if a family member dies.
Yeah,
Sure.
sure.
You may not want a bot just saying, "Hey, this is the payout." So, I think it is horses for courses when it comes to the actual servicing on each side, and there's always going to be the great thing about I always think about insurance is like you can stack so many different services around the product, so you can make it as hands-on or as hands-off as you think the customer needs it to be, and that provides huge opportunities to provide a great service.
Can I ask you this as well? You talked about data. You talked about there are plenty of different services you can offer on this. We didn't talk about this at all yet, but is there a way to like personalize these services, but personalize them at scale, particularly as the platforms continue to mature?
So I look at this, the way that we're kind of thinking about this, and we haven't cracked it yet because I think we're using and looking at like different user groups, but it's kind of like maybe choice by exception. You would have a product or service that would kind of hit the mark for 80%. And then depending on the level of maturity or specific requirement, that's when the customization comes in. So to scale that, I think that's the best way, at least in my opinion today, given kind of the construct that it actually exists. I think over time, ultimate customization would almost be dynamic and automatic. But like right now, I would say that you would have kind of a default coverage for the most with an opt-in, opt-out, and then adjustment for the few. That's a little bit of the way that we're looking at it.
It makes sense in the sense ultimately you're going to have a shape of what can be kind of sort of predetermined.
Yeah.
And that you're going to have to build around that shape. But also I think over time we're going to learn that ultimately personas and needs fit into a bucket of shapes.
Yeah,
that
I don't
that
disagree with
are
you
going to
at all.
be repeatable and scalable.
Yeah.
I'm sure Mike, you're as a the work you do and your daily sort of the daily things you encounter that could provide risk. Same here. What I do, I'm sure there are millions of people around the world who have the sort of same exposures on a daily basis. So I think and that's how insurance works, right? You pool the risk, and then ultimately that enables everyone to get a good price and get paid out. So I do see that it's just a natural progression. It's going to happen. It's got to happen, and it's exciting.
One last thing before I let you guys go. In 7 years, this is kind of a theoretical question, right? And either one of you can go first. What do you hope people say your company changed? Not what it sold, but what it changed. If they look back, what do you think that is?
The way that I'm looking at this is that I think I would love for Wolt or the DoorDash kind of like family of businesses to not only be remembered for the tech stack, but also remembered for the safety net and kind of the dignity and kind of recognition that we're providing to the platform economy. And that would be all users on the platform economy. So I would say that would be the thing. So moving from risk, ultimately having risk transfer as a basic service.
That's very cool. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to meet that North Star, but I think for what I'd want to see in EMEA, certainly and broader Chubb Digital, is our ability to make it possible for partners like Wolt to deliver at scale all of the needs and requirements that their multiple partners, merchants, end users, etc., all of those critical people in the value chain, being able to deliver the products that they need to live sustainably and for there to be a minimal amount of underinsurance, I think would be an amazing legacy for Chubb's digital business.
Awesome. Garrett Olson, the head of insurance and ARM at Wolt, and Sebastian de Zulueta, the head of digital business for Chubb EMEA. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. I also want to thank Renata Concheri for engineering this. She's awesome as well. Thank you both.
Thank you, Mike. A lot of fun.
Thank you, Mike.